The world won't understand you. Hey, but it's okay. Said the world won't understand you, 'cause I made you in my own way. Said the world won't understand you.
Hey, what's good, everybody? Welcome to episode 17 of In a Good Way podcast. Hope you guys have all been well. Like you've seen, I took a little break. Mostly the summer. It was just, I had to take some time to do other things. But I wanted to start this episode off by not really going back, but I had this experience, and I guess, I'm going to talk about it real quick. Without going into too many other things, I'll jump right into it. I had this experience, and I didn't really know what it meant, but after it kind of clicked, everything came together. And it started this morning, like at 4 a.m. I was at a gas station, and I seen this thing running across the street, and I was like, what's that? And then I noticed it was too big to be a cat, right? But and then it was running funny, so I was like, okay, it's not a dog. And then it jumps up on this little wall and across the street, and then it stops and looks at me, and then it lifts up its tail, and I see it's a raccoon, right? So I was like, oh, wow. I could count on one hand how many times I've seen a raccoon. I've seen a few dead ones. I don't even know when I've seen a live one, right? So it got my attention. I looked it up. I started looking at the meaning of it. One of the things that jumped out at me was the adaptability, right? They're meat eaters and plant eaters. So really, whatever comes, they eat, right? Like whatever they find, they eat. So, and then a lot to do with family. There was a really interesting story about how, when they'll do raids. So even that's crazy, right? Like raccoons will do raids. And when they do raids, they'll have a lookout. And after whatever they get, they always give the best to the lookout, right? So, they take care of the lookout first, and then they get whatever else, right? So it was pretty interesting to me. There's just a lot about the raccoon. So I really liked the raccoon, but like I said, adaptability definitely jumped out at me, and it's a very resourceful creature, right? So I was happy that it jumped, that I saw it. I ran into it, and then I went later on, like I went for this mountain bike ride, and as I was going, I was thinking of this story, what I was gonna share, or if I should make a video, because I was kind of hitting a wall, right? Like there was a few people I wanted to interview. I had messages, I'm like quite a few, right? And people weren't getting back to me. Some people weren't able to. Some people changed their mind. Different things like that, right? So I was kind of even thinking, do I still want to do the spiritual channel? I was already thinking I'm going to do other stuff instead. I like that. I like doing these podcasts, but maybe I'm going to go into something else. But then all of this came to me, right? And as I'm like, okay, as I'm thinking this, as I'm in the mountains, like riding my bike, right as I'm thinking that a red-tailed hawk flies over me and does the screeching, and I was like, okay, cool. So that was the little confirmation, like, go ahead and do this now that you see the big picture, right? Because the hawk always represents like seeing everything, right? And especially the red tail, that's an animal I have a very close relationship with. So all that, right? So anyways, it all started like a few weeks ago, right? So a few weeks ago, I was working this job. So before I started work that day, I had a dream, right? And in this dream, it was like I was in a room and I was with someone, right? And I start floating, and I'm floating, and I'm up in the ceiling, and this person's looking at me like, wow, like they can't go up. So they were just staring at me like, wow. And I look at them, I'm like, oh, okay. So then in the dream, like, I'm aware. So I'm like, I don't know how to go back down. But then I meditate, right? Like in the dream, I'm telling myself, wait, I got this. And so I focus, and I start floating back down. And then I'm right there with that person. And then it was weird. Then that was the part that like, it ended up coming true. Because I ended up meeting somebody. Well, okay, in the dream, it was like, I don't know. Then I'm hugging this person, right? I'm hugging this person, and then I don't know, we're just giving this long embrace, and I put my head sideways. Like when you're comfortable with someone and you kind of just like lean into them, right? Like your head, like you're that comfortable, you just lean into them. So anyways, when I was at work, there was this, I don't know, we ended up talking about spiritual stuff. It never fails, right? Like I always find the person, for anyone that knows, it's like when I work, the probabilities are already like strange, right? Like when we work these jobs, it's like hundreds or thousands of people that try to get this job. We end up getting it. And so it's already like meant to be kind of thing, right? Like I even made a video about the very reason I started the podcast was because I ran into this specific person and we had the similar experience, and I had to do with my brother and her cousin, this and that. And so it triggered all this that made me end up starting the podcast, right? So, here's this stranger. We're talking kind of about spiritual stuff. And then after, I look at her and like I look at her and she's kind of smiling and it's like she wanted to say something, but then she holds back. And then I tell her, well, go ahead and say it. And we were already talking about spiritual stuff, right? That's kind of like, it never fails. I always open it up with the spiritual stuff and then someone else. But it's always meant to be, right? Like I always find the people that we could talk about that stuff, right? So, we're talking and then she smiles and then I'm like, well, like I could tell she wanted to say something, but then she wasn't. And then I asked her to tell me what she was gonna say. And then so she said like she was gonna ask like if she could hug me or if I wanted a hug or something like that, right? And so then I'm just, I'm tripping out. Like it was so random. And so then we end up hugging, right? She was gonna leave and then we end up hugging. And this is like the longest hug, right? And, we just keep hugging. And then after, like, I guess I take a breath and I lean my head into her like that. And it clicked, the dream, right? I was like, oh, like crazy. I just dreamed this morning. And then something else happened from the dream. So I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. And so, it just tripped me out, right? And this was probably like, it was one of those, like, probably one of the top 5 hugs I've had like in my life that I could remember, right? It's just like I don't know if it's because it's a stranger, right? Or, it's crazy. Like I've even hugged friends where they're like, you could tell after a while, people get uncomfortable, right? They're like, people don't know how to like give a good hug, like a heartfelt hug. Like, like it's almost like, I'm sure like you get those kind of hugs from your mom, maybe, or stuff like that. But it's like those, it's crazy, it's just hard to explain, right? It's just hard to explain like those kind of hugs. But it was like in the top 5. I won't say what order it was in, but I was just tripping out that happened, right? So that part of the dream came true, right? But the part that that stuck with me was that I feel like the message I got was how in the dream I was floating. Like I don't know why, like what exactly happened, but how in the dream I was floating, and it made me think about all these podcast episodes that I've done. How maybe, because we kind of jumped right into it. It's been since the beginning. It's been more from like intermediate to advanced with spirituality, right? I've never really talked about, because I was just talking to one of the people that I interviewed. We've stayed in contact. All these things that keep happening to them, they've shared with me. And then, I've been able to share things that keep happening to me. And, I was saying that how, like, since things just happened to me, I never really sat down and thought about how can I teach people that want to develop their spirituality. How can I teach them? Because to me, I never really it's never been about, like, let me sit down and meditate. Even though now that I think about it, I did used to do that. So I guess I just forgot. I forgot all those steps. And I feel like that dream was telling me, like, the way I was floating, and this person's looking at me like, well, shoot, I don't know how to float. Like, what are you doing? Like, up there. And I had to come back down. And I made a video. I don't know if it's been years or at least a year ago or more that, I was talking about, because I've had 3 different spiritual channels, and I wish I would have just stuck with one, but it's fine, right? That's why I made the lost videos. I made like a few of those old ones that I brought from like another channel, and And so this that I'm about to say is something I had posted on something else too. It was about like finding your purpose, right? Finding out how to find out your purpose. And for me, I said how the universe left me little signs about me being a bridge, right? Me being a bridge. Even the very first tattoo I got, it represented a bridge. Like, it's like this shield, right? And on one side is an angel, on the other one it's like a demon, right? And I used to say, like, when I got it, oh, like, between angels and demons, there you will find me, right? Like, when I got it and everything. I used to say that in my head. Because I had it's like, I was transitioning, right? I grew up around all, like, hood stuff and this and that. People that grind, do what you got to do to survive kind of thing. And I was transitioning over to, like, living a regular life, if you want to call it that. But more like, and I'll make another video. I wanted to talk about, there's a lot of things about masculine, femininity, all this stuff. And I wanted to explain for those that don't know, right? Like, in a good way, and the best way I can describe it. Because how I, I'll just save it for the other one because it's kind of a lot. So I don't want to go off into that. But anyways, back to the being a bridge thing, right? I had this thing, right? And that's what it represented, like a bridge between both worlds, right? Like I'm in the middle, even though like they're both holding me up, but it's kind of like, I understand. And that's one of the things about spirituality. You got to understand your dark and your light side, right? In the native culture, it's more like, like I was taught that darkness isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like the way they made it, like dark is evil. Because the way it was explained to me by an elder was, even when you're in the womb, you're in darkness. Is the darkness hurting you? No, you're growing inside the womb, right? And it's dark. When if you're in the dark too long and then you come out into the light hurts your eyes, right? So there's proof right there that the dark isn't always bad. The dark actually, so that's the thing about life. Like you have to learn both, right? So I learned, but I was left hints, right, by the universe. Like I was born in TJ, which connects two worlds, right? The US and Mexico, which, it's always all this friction, right? But I was born on there where I connect two worlds, right? And I came fairly young. And then it was funny because the first city I lived in was this city called Southgate. And it was funny because it's like if I came from the South, right? Like I came through the South Gate into this other place, And of course we could get into the borders didn't exist and all this stuff. But just to say that, right? Like I was born there. And then I ended up, after Southgate, the next city I lived in was called La Puente, which, there was, I think this hip hop group, they even call themselves Bridgetown that were from La Puente. So, the Bridgetown, right? La Puente, which is incorrect Spanish too. It'd be like El Puente, I'm guessing, right? But, whatever, they called it El Puente, right? But in English, there was even a hip hop group, Bridgetown. I think there was a gang that even called themselves Bridgetown. Or I seen someone once with a tattoo that said Bridgetown, right? So, all that, right? So to me, it left me hints that, and even with music, right? I remember the first album I worked on when I was in a group, I brought all these people from different ethnicities together. And I did it without telling anybody. But it was just like music brought all these people together. So I've always done that without even really thinking about it. But I knew what I was doing. I didn't really tell people. But so there's always been a bridge there, right? Different cultures, different ethnicities that aren't supposed to get along, different things like that, right? But the universe left me hints because of that, right? Where I was born, this and that. So it left me breadcrumbs, right? So I made a video about that, how it'll give you breadcrumbs. Everybody, whatever you feel, often it's your passion, right? So then my passion was music, and music brings so many people together, right? And you're able to communicate. Of course, there's a balance. Of course, sometimes I did sway into but I transitioned, just like how I said, like the demons and angels, right? Like, transitioning. Even with music, I started off with what people would consider gangster rap, right? That was the first album, kind of had more of that feel. And then after I went into Then I started getting invited to rap at churches, and they would ask me, "Oh, you have any positive songs?" I was like, "Yeah." So, I started recording the positive songs I had, and then I kind of just went on, for a long time. Then I would go make some songs where I just needed a vent and whatever. So, it was always that struggle. But to me, it was therapeutic. So I don't know. I can't really regret anything with the music. I mean, even though there's probably like 5 songs that I actually regretted recording, but I know at the time it was like, I don't know, maybe I needed that, right? So anyways, so that's how like I found out for myself, right? Like there's passions and different things that start showing you your path. And not that your path isn't going to change. Sometimes all that leads you to something else, right? You know, like there's just so many things, and you figure that out. But anyways, that dream reminded me, right? The way I was floating, and it was like, wow, it's like, how am I gonna like, just jump out and jump all the way ahead. Like I've been listening to some people that have, like, I think a podcast and some other videos that they make that I think will be way advanced for, I guess, just everyday people. But since I've experienced just about everything as far as like across the spiritual spectrum or whatever, I get it. I'll listen to it. Like I just listened to this video. I think it was like 3 hours and 30 minutes, right? And I hung on to everything because it was like all that information just I was resonating with it. And the guy was speaking very, things that will probably confuse people that never took the time to learn, right? Like I want to make a whole video about like the Bible, right? The basic instructions before leaving Earth. I was told that a long time ago, right? Basic instructions before leaving Earth. That was one of my first things that I studied because I didn't have any access to anybody else, right? It was before the internet, before you could go on, connect to spiritual. I remember when MySpace was out, I was trying to connect to people would post spiritual things, and like people will be like, oh, something about psychic, and then I'll be like, oh, there's someone else like me, and then I'll message them, and they're like, oh no, I was just saying that. Like sometimes I feel like I'm psychic because I'll say something and it happens, or I guess things, and I'll be like, oh, okay. So then, but I remember that, like, even with MySpace, when people would say things and I'll reach out to them, I would get excited. So even when MySpace came out, people still weren't connecting like they are now, or at least not in my case, right? I didn't find people to connect with. So, yeah. So anyways, now, I want to be able to be that bridge, right? Like, it doesn't matter. I've already experienced, it feels like all the way. Like I'm pretty set. Like, that's why I couldn't be bullied into being of a certain religion or nothing, right? Because I already know, like, I'm good, right? Like if I die today, I'm good. So while I'm still here, I just want to help with what I could. Like, I made a video about how I got hit by a car. When I was riding my bike, I got hit by a car. And all that kind of triggered something too. But the funny thing was, like, I had finally, because usually I'll put notes on a calendar. And so I actually wrote it out because I had so many things in that dream. Like 7 things from that dream all came true. So I was like, wow, like it never ceases to amaze me how exact these dreams. Because, it's sad because even when I've talked to elders, they're like, I've been told like, oh, well, dreams are just dreams. Not mine. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Like, I thought this happened to more people, but for me, it's like when I dream stuff, not always, but I could decipher it. I know when sometimes there's things that mess with me. They'll give me a dream. I learned now to wait. And sometimes, like, I had this crazy dream that kind of bugged me, but then, like, 2 days later, I saw it in a movie. So I was like, oh crap, like what the hell? Like it was insane. Like, so it still came true, but it wasn't in my experience because it felt like something that happened to me, but it was just a premonition of some movie I was going to watch that had this crazy thing happen, right? So sometimes even that, you got to wait, or in my experience, I got to wait and then I'll see it unfold So I learned about that too, that sometimes things do try to mess with me. Not that they try to mess with me, maybe they just give it to me, and then, it was just meant that I was going to see that. But then when I'm seeing a movie and it's like, oh, wow, like that was a damn dream I had. So, that's how exact it is. So it's hard sometimes to talk to people. Like I said, even elders will be like, well, a dream's just a dream. Well, not mine, yeah, not mine, right? After all these years of life, like, it is what it is, right? So anyways, I want to bridge, like I said, I want to go back. I'm going to have to go back a little. I'm going to try to do interviews that don't feel so out there, because some of the people I was going to interview, it was going to be some really heavy stuff. Like, if you're not used to the spiritual, I'm going to take it back. Like I said, I'm going to make a whole video talking about the Bible, right? Like, because that was one of my first references. But just to give you like a little teaser about it, it's kind of like how they used to tell me the Bible meant for basic instructions before leaving Earth. And when, like, in today's culture, like, you could see it. When is basic a good thing? Basic is the bare minimum. So even like basic training in the military, basic training is just what you need to get into the military. Then you still go to the, if you're infantry, you go to SOI. If you're not infantry, you go to MCT, military combat training, right? Or SOI, School of Infantry. And then you go to your school for your job, whatever your job you chose in the military, you still got to go to school for that. Then there's endless training. You never stop training until you get out of the military. But basic is the beginning. When you try to insult someone, you call them a basic beep, like that's what basic is, right? So if you're a bare minimum person, that's why the Bible to me was basic instructions before leaving Earth. And I kept going after that. So that's why, like, when people have, there's people that are still scared, right? So I want to break that stigma too. People that just got hooked on the religions. There's enough evidence now that people should not be so close-minded, right? They should understand. I'm never going to, since, like I said, it was my first reference, that's why I'm not going to disrespect. I know the way it was used, right? To all the horrors that were done to my ancestors, other people's ancestors, in the name of these religions, and because they saw what they could do with it, right? But I can't blame it, because it helped me in my spiritual journey, right? So I understand, like how they say, right? Like the gun, like there's a gun, and someone could use it for protection, but the evil people that go do it, like, there was just this rapper that got killed, right? They robbed him for a chain, and then they shot him, right? So you could be like, oh, the evil guns, right? But it was the person the one that did what they did to him, right? Like, obviously one of those could be used for protection, but it's like that, right? So I can't just blame the Bible and be like, oh, that thing's evil. Even though it was foreign to us, but I understand it. It was important to understand, because obviously that's what they used, right? That's what they used. That was a huge part of colonizing and taking away everything we had spiritually, just how advanced our cultures were. And that was a huge tool to oppress, indigenous people, right? So I had to learn it. I had to understand, I guess, I had to understand this book, right? And to me, the funny thing, what I found once I learned about it, was that these people that used it didn't even believe it, right? So that was the funny thing. And then that empowered me to know, like I have more in common. Walking in a spiritual way, I had more in common with what the book taught than even the people using it to preach, right? Even the people that are in the church preaching, even these. So that's why then it lost that kind of hold. I don't know if you're following me with what I'm saying, but it's still valuable to me. And so I don't feel like anyone that claims it, like, oh, they can't make me feel anything. Like, I know where I'm going. Like, when I pass from here, everything, like the things that I've seen, no one could scare me into thinking this. No one could that, right? So I'm very sure in my stance and my walk, and so I'll make a whole video about that, right? Like, I don't know how I went off into that, You know, I actually made a list for this video because, you know, I was watching, when I was looking up the raccoon, there was a lady that it was funny because today's the 18th and she made her video on the 18th of, I don't know what year, like maybe a year ago or something. So I was like, okay, that's a funny coincidence. But she kept talking about all this other stuff. She never got to the raccoon, so I had to listen to somebody else. And there were some people that had a lot of knowledge about the raccoon spiritual meaning and all that. So yeah, that's why I was like, you know what, let me make a list. I was like, maybe that's how I sound sometimes. I'll go all over the place. And maybe I did even on this podcast episode, right? But like I said, thanks to that dream, you know, that dream about like I was floating and I had to come back down, because I mean, what's the point? You know, and since I mentioned the Bible, like there's even a thing in there about like, it talks about like, I think speaking in tongues, and it's like, you know, speaking in tongues, like what does it matter if people don't understand you, or speaking in a different tongue? It's like the point is for people to understand you. So I'd rather people understand. So if I gotta come back down, then let me get back down to how people, anyone that wants, right? And of course, interacting with this channel is important, right? Like leave comments, hit the like, subscribe. If you feel someone will get something out of it, share it. You know, so the channel could grow, right? More people. I'm gonna try to still keep interviewing people that could bring knowledge. And even like I said, right, like I had to think about how can I teach, right? How can I teach so I'm not just sharing these stories and no one's getting anything out of it, right? No one knows what steps to take. So I'll say this last thing, right? Like when I did start, you know, for me, like, I don't know if it matters to people, it might not, but right, like I'm a Gemini, right? So my brain's all over the place. It never really stops, right? And so what I used to do is I would go like, you know, I would have to, you know, I'm running these hills, right? And it'd be like, I think I had a GPS watch once that I borrowed from my brother that I saw it was like 7 miles, right? But there's a lot of steep hills and this and that. So, you know, it takes a while. And, you know, I would go running and then, you know, sometimes I'd do like 500 push-ups, 500 sit-ups, all this stuff. So I'll be drained. And then when I'll finish the run, I'll sit up in the hill, right? So I used to sit there and I used to ask for signs. Like I used to ask questions, and sometimes I would say that like if this is correct, you know, let a little hummingbird come, because that was the first spirit animal that started coming to me. When I started noticing, I was like, wow, this hummingbird always appears when something's happening and it never fails. So that was my first little thing, the hummingbird. And then I read up on it. It talked about how like for Aztecs, it was like the souls of lost of warriors that had passed, you know, they would turn into hummingbirds, and hummingbirds were like the animal that could travel between both worlds, right? Because it was so fast. So I felt like, okay, I'm getting messages from an ancestor that passed. So someone's giving me messages, right? Through these hummingbirds. So I would sit on this hill, sometimes 2-3 hours just right there. Sometimes I'd be freezing because I'd finish running as the sun was setting, and I'd be all like drenched in sweat, and then I'll be sitting there just freezing saying, all right, like I'm gonna sit up here, get sick, so give me my sign, like I'm not gonna move. And then sometimes like after the sun had set and everything, and you could barely see, and usually hummingbirds, like when the sun sets, they're not around, but then all of a sudden a hummingbird would show up in the dark, and I'll be like, oh, like, okay, cool, thank you. Like, so I would get my thing. But see, I would meditate, and I'll see things too. I think that's when it started. So I would meditate. I just didn't remember that I actually, but I had to get rid of all that energy first. See, like I couldn't just meditate like other people. I couldn't just sit still. Like I would be so impatient, right? And still to this day, really. So I would have to burn all that energy first, you know, run 7 miles in these hills, you know, do all these push-ups, sit-ups, all this stuff, and then sit, and then, you know, and that's how I would do it, right? So that's what it would take just for me to meditate. So, you know, maybe I got to start doing that again, like start trying to burn all that energy before I could just sit down and but it still happens, right? I'll go to the mountain. Now it just happens on the fly, right? Like I'll be doing stuff and I'll start getting all these messages, or while I dream and all this stuff. But when I barely started, that's how it started for me, right? So I just wanted to share that. Yeah, so I think that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out. Hopefully I wasn't all over the place. And like I said, yeah, subscribe, support the channel, and I'll keep bringing you guys more things. You know, as things happen, I'll try to bring them. You know, and just to go back, touch one time, like, you know, like even that hug, right? This complete stranger that gave me this hug, it mattered, right? It was very, like, it felt great, right? It changed my whole mood. Not that I was in a bad mood, because I was in a good place. But I don't know. I felt like I needed it, right? It kind of did feel like it brought me back to life even more so. Like, you know, this stranger that, I don't know what put it in her to ask me, like, if I needed a hug or wanted a hug, you know. But, you know, it was, you know, it stayed in my head. I mean, I'm still talking about it now. This was weeks ago, so obviously it mattered, right? And, you know, even that, right? Think about it. In the time of, you know, this whole pandemic and everything, like, I don't know how comfortable everybody else is yet. Like, maybe people already did get back to normal. I just hadn't really realized it, right? Like, I kind of just been sticking to myself and, you know, working, doing stuff like that. But maybe I hadn't really noticed, like, people got back to normal or what. But you know, things like that, like, they could change someone's mood, right? Like I said, I could count it on one hand. I think, like hugs like that I've gotten throughout my life, and they matter. You know, they matter. Like, you never know how you're gonna affect someone. So I'm really grateful that I met that person. You know, so now that they, like, you know, they're stored in there, like, as a special person, right? That's a, you know, very, you know, beautiful on the outside and inside, right? Like this person, right? So they radiate that, they have that good energy. So I'm glad that there's people like that out there, and you know, it's a beautiful thing. So, you know, okay, so the camera got too hot. I just wanted to say thank you properly. So thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one. All right, take care. Thank you.
Are we just fools? Do what we can to get by. I shed many tears inside, so come look at this one through my eyes. They tell me it's a setup. I will tell you to keep your head up. Whoa, I know you're living fed up, so maybe it's this time that we stand and fight. You know, hey, look at little Johnny, he's clutching on his Glock. He doesn't care what happens, cause he never knew his pops. And he says he hates the world and wants to end it bad. When he was young, he got that's right. Yeah, sometimes you just feeling it, you know what I'm saying? You just feeling it. And I wanna feel this way forever.